I ran into some issues with what I would call toxic management. Over a long period of time, if you are in that kind of a pressure cooker environment and the hits just keep on coming, you're going to suffer.
How ironic that it was happening in a healthcare context. Literally, your healthcare job was making you sick. Unbelievable.
They did a really good job taking care of patients, but they couldn't do the same with people inside their four walls. And so what happens, I stepped out of the shower one morning, boom! Face planted on my bathroom tile floor, and I couldn't move. I was basically paralyzed from the waist down.
You say that leadership should be kind. How does that reconcile for us?
When empathy reaches a leadership conversation as a skill, it helps to bring people together.
How do I make that connection between leadership and humility?
You have to accept the limits of your knowledge. The other thing that humility does as a leader, which increases trust, is
My very special guest is a speaker, author, acclaimed executive coach, and an Inc. magazine contributing editor with a global following. He's the author of Humane Leadership, Lead with Radical Love, Be a Kick-Ass Boss. And he hosts the popular Love in Action podcast, which is heard in over 160 countries. He is Marcel Schwantes. Welcome to the show. Marcel, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Now I'm here with you. I mean, I'm trying to keep up my energy with your energy, so hopefully it works out.
It's great energy because, I have had a chance to be on your show a long time ago, and you've been on mine, and I'm so excited to have you back because we're going to be talking all about your new book, which is fabulous, all about humane leadership. So I just can't wait. I just love getting your good stuff in front of my audience.
Let's do it. Let's get rolling. Can't wait.
Well, some of them may not be as familiar with your backstory as I am. So I just wanted to start us with this notion. You had this traumatic experience at one point, but it shaped this philosophy that you've now written about in Humane Leadership. I wonder if you could just let us know what happened and what effect did that have really on your work and life, Marcel?
Oh, okay. So yeah, we're going back to 2002, and I was still very much a young corporate guy, and working at a hospital. And I was in this residency program that grooms you to become an HR leader, right? So it's like you finish the program, and the intent was for me to be placed in one of the hospitals under the parent company. Well, throughout that 2-year experience, I ran into some issues with what I would call toxic management. I know nowadays that's a buzzy term, right? Toxic manager, toxic leadership. I write a lot on Inc. I'm always using that. But I happen to be in an environment that was the stress was so intense because of the kind of management that didn't really value humanity. It was a very top-down, autocratic command and control environment, as you can imagine, that had very unrealistic expectations for our performance and our productivity. So what happened was, as the stress built, my body couldn't sustain the immense sort of like the cortisol and the adrenaline, all of these chemicals that rush through your body during fight or flight mode. Those things, are natural hormones that are kicking in, right? But over a long period of time, if you are in that kind of a pressure cooker environment and the hits just keep on coming, you're going to suffer. And so what happened is I stepped out of the shower one morning and boom, went straight down, face planted on my bathroom tile floor, and I couldn't move. I was basically paralyzed from the waist down. That was about a 2-month recovery process. Went on disability, and then as I researched what happened to me, and talking to my primary care physician, the ER doctor even said. He asked me, what's your stress level on the scale of 1 to 10? I said the 25. He goes, well, yeah, you experienced somatic. It was a somatic experience, meaning that whatever was going on emotionally and mentally at the time, it resulted in physical symptoms, and so my back, everything just kind of went right to my back, and I couldn't move. So I couldn't go to work, So when I came back to that hospital after I recovered, and I was still, it's such a traumatic experience. You recover physically, but you come back, you're still walking on eggshells. Like, okay, what am I walking back into? They demanded a letter of apologies for my act of quote insubordination. That was kind of interesting. So I was at the point where I'll do whatever it takes just to keep my peace of mind so that I can just get work done and get the heck out of here when this project is over. Well, finally it was over. 2 years came. I was able to withstand, that period of time. I was like, wow, I can't believe I actually literally survived that environment, because the research states that if you are in a prolonged state of toxic management environments, it could lead to lots of bad things, heart disease, including heart attacks and, well, death. So when I left that place, then I began my study of why is it that human beings, when they are given power and influence, will completely dehumanize other human beings when they sit up from a higher perch. And thus began my investigation of into humane leadership, and then the love aspect of that kicked in a little bit later. So here we are, about what is that? We're in 2025, so this has been a work in progress for 2 decades now, Matt.
Yeah, it's such a profound reminder that the environment that we're operating in is naturally filtered through our experience, and it has no recourse but to show up in our bodies. So a lot of times we think that it's a mental game, or we think we're just going to muscle through this, but literally our muscles and everything else in our bodies will carry the effects of that, both positive and negative. And whether it's we find ourselves knowledge workers sitting for a long time, sure, but what about the stressors? What about the trauma that we can experience? So I think it was an unfortunate thing that happened, but I love that you parlayed that into study and saying what happened here, and eventually said, how do we prevent this from happening in other places? How ironic that it was happening in a healthcare context, that
Yeah.
literally your healthcare job was making you sick. Unbelievable.
Right. I mean, they did a really good job taking care of patients, but they couldn't do the same with people inside their four walls.
So wild. And that's a system that has very macro challenges. It's a stressful job anyway. But I think that, as you pointed out, when we make things worse through our management styles and approaches, then that's the part that we think we can chip away at. But in your book, and you touched on this too, which is that you say that most organizations see people as objects or functions, as a means to an end in a transaction. And I think you were just talking about that too, that mechanical sort of approach. And we see it, as you mentioned, in healthcare, but also we see it in lots of parts of the business world for sure. What is it that keeps us from learning that lesson, Marcel? Why is it just proven to be so durable? You mentioned it's 2025 now. How come we still have these organizations that are looking very transactionally about the work being done, as if they don't have people doing that work?
Yeah. Well, my understanding of why this thing keeps happening, and it's passed on from generation to generation, I believe, and I mentioned this in the book, Matt, that I think that we've hung on to these relics of the Industrial Revolution, where back, how far you want to go, I don't know, 75, 100 years, where workers just they just took their marching orders, they clocked in and out, and they collected a paycheck. That was their existence in the workplace. It was a transactional experience, like you said, of trading my skills for pay. And so there was really no emotional attachment. There was no such thing as employee engagement back then. It wasn't a requirement, right? And so over the years, we didn't change. We didn't get rid of those things, right? So we're in a much different age now. I mean, workers are more agile. They are incredibly resourceful, right? And more empowered than ever. So clearly we see the workforce has evolved, and funny, it has evolved even more so after COVID, right? And so why hasn't leadership kept up with the pace of evolution? I mean, we're not leading people. We're still managing people as if it was, if they were still cogs in the wheel going back 75 years, 100 years ago in those assembly lines, right? So leadership, I believe, has to go through its own evolution. And I think that we're getting there, but we still have so many places of work that hang on to these notions of seeing people through the eyes of transactions, and they're just here to do work. And so, and take orders. So you disempower and dehumanize the workplace by just treating them that way.
Yeah, I think we really do focus on a lot of the output, a lot of the metrics, the numbers. It makes us feel like our businesses are nice and rational. Like, if we just do the right inputs, then we'll get the right outputs, and then we'll all be happy and profitable, and we'll grow, and all these fun things will happen in our careers. And it's not that those things aren't true, but I think it's a mistake, as you're pointing out, to pretend that it's not our people and their emotional well-being and their physical well-being and their levels of engagement and all these things that are going to make all that machinery, so to speak, possible. And I feel like there are a new class of leaders now, certainly listeners of this show, that realize that it's not an either or. We have to do both. We can't totally be, humanistic and at the expense of solid business sense. That doesn't work. But at the same time, if we're too mechanical about it, that's not a reflection of what's really happening inside of organizations either.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I look at the well-being piece, right? I mean, if you're expecting high performance and you're expecting profits and productivity to be at a high level, but your workforce, the well-being of your workforce is at an all-time low, there's your correlation right there. You don't have to go any further than looking at how is the mental health of my workforce right now? Because if it's not at a good place, then you're not going to get the best out of your employees.
Well, and what I appreciate most about your work, and you've been at this a lot longer than I have, in that you have your podcast that you've had for a long time now. You've grown it to great success. It's called Love in Action. It's got the L word right in it. And this is a theme that you taught me to become more comfortable with too, is this concept that it's okay to talk about love in the context of, because work is people oriented, then we can use that. And I just wonder, you and I haven't chatted in a little bit, but is it something that you still feel causes people to kind of stop in their tracks, or have you yourself gotten more comfortable using the L word, as it were, in this business context of ours?
Yeah, a lot more comfortable these days. I don't think I was using the L word even during the initial stages of COVID, but because there was so much caring and power and during that phase of our lives where people were suffering to such a high degree, the managers had to kind of step up and deal with the uncertainty and boost mental health and well-being, et cetera. So it's easier now to use the L word. And sometimes I may call it care or empowerment or empathy, depending on, who my client is or who I'm speaking to, right? But so much of leadership, think about it, so much of leadership, principles, practices, habits are rooted in care and love. We just don't use the term, but we should. So we have to kind of normalize the word in the right context, of course. And so what we're talking in speaking of business context, what we're talking about is when we say love, in the Greek sense of the word, which is where I got all of my definitions from for the book, right? When we talk about radical love, what does that mean exactly? In the Greek sense of the word, it's agape, right? So that's not a feeling. It's not there's nothing fuzzy. It's not an emotion. You don't lead with emotion or feeling. It's not romantic love. So, listeners, if you're an HR leader, don't worry. We're not talking about that kind of love either. It's not the same kind of love that you demonstrate for your family, your children. That's philia love, right? It's not charitable love, right? Like tithing to your church or handing money to a homeless person on the side of the street. All those things are good expressions of love. But in the workplace, agape love is backed by action on behalf of another person in relationship to one another, right? So it's the kind of It's the kind of love that says, "Hey, I will do whatever it takes as your manager, as your boss, to set you up for success here, to make sure that you are taken care of, and that you have a great employee experience." That falls on the manager side of the fence, right? The employee side of the fence, they still have some responsibility to respond really well and be a good follower and good citizen at work, right? And perform well. But the manager have to set the conditions necessary for that kind of output, for that kind of high performance, right? So it's a way of saying we care about you here, and this is how we're going to demonstrate that you belong here and that you matter, right? And so that's the kind of love that we're talking about. It is just backed with action.
Yeah, as I've continued from the conversations we've had, I've continued my studies, and in a philosophical sense too, they talk about fear for self versus love for other, and how do you move from that intense self-interest and that worry about being isolated or something bad happening toward, being willing to demonstrate servant leadership and demonstrate, others' interest, all in line with the mission. And I think this is the part sometimes that nothing we talk about is in a vacuum, right? So we're not talking about how people feel on the job as if they didn't have a job to do. The point is simply we've got to be able to make sure that they feel the care, we'll use that word, at the same time that we're pursuing the objectives and the goal. And because if they don't, and then all of a sudden, everything gets hard, or people don't want to work, as well with one another. They don't feel that mattering that you talked about. And then it's kind of, gums up the work, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I'll move us back to this, the notion of your excellent book. And you talk about 5 different characteristics of leadership. And I do agree with you 100% that these parallels between leadership and love are very, very tight and very appropriate, as long as we have the right definition, the way you've taught us to today. And so I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about each of these, just briefly. I think the first one that you talk about is leadership is patient. In what ways, in this go time of ours, seems like everything's moving faster than ever, in what ways can and should leadership, Marcel, be patient?
Yeah. So I identified 3 business applications for leaders and to showcase for in a team environment or even for organizational performance. And one is you have to use patience to slow down to improve decision making, because when you slow down and think things through, you can actually speed up later in your decision making because you're making the right decisions. So there's less bottlenecks and less worry about, are we making the right decisions, when you kind of just process through information, talk to more people. And so that takes patience. It's slowing down initially in order to speed up later. And that is the reason you do it, is to improve decision making. The second thing that you need to do is you use patience to improve well-being and mental health. We've already covered that. It's to eliminate stress and anxiety in the workplace, right? By being more patient. And then the third thing that I mentioned is you have to leverage patience as a strategy to build a strong relationship. So that means then you may, if you're not a good listener, well, activate your listening skills by using patience to understand the world around you. So that's really the one of patience. I can keep going if you want with the other 4.
Yeah. No, I think that's amazing. And I love that notion. Sometimes we feel like we have to move quickly to match, for example, like a competitive response or a customer complaint or something. We feel like we got to launch into action because that's what leaders do. Well, actually, the best leaders will call a quick timeout. Let's make sure we fully understand the situation, right? Demonstrate that patience. And there's an old special forces mantra: slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And that's what your comment brought that to mind for me. But we'll move on to the second one, which is around kind. So kindness doesn't always get celebrated. When we think about who gets promoted all the time, or the types of people we splash across our headlines. But you say that leadership should be kind. How does that reconcile for us?
Yeah, leadership is kind in 2 ways. We don't often talk about our personal interactions because we think so much on a grander level about systems and more on the organizational 30,000 foot level. Well, bring that down to how do we demonstrate kindness, say in a one-on-one or one-on-team environment? Well, it's through empathetic interactions. That's what I mentioned in the book. So when empathy reaches a a leadership conversation as a skill, a conversational skill in your team, it helps to bring people together. So, and I mentioned active listening. I'll do it again. That involves active listening, showing interest in others, and really practicing perspective taking. So that's how you demonstrate kindness through empathetic interactions. And the second thing that I mentioned in the book is proactive compassion, right? So this is taking empathy and just sort of like it's empathy on steroids, because now you want to now that you understand through conversation what's going on around you, now you want to remove obstacles from people's path, and you want to alleviate suffering, if you will, so that they can perform better, so they have better well-being, etc. And that all leads to business outcomes. So we're not doing this. Yes, we should do it because it's the right thing to do as humane leaders. It's how we demonstrate our love for people, right? And so what happens, all of those things lend, if you have skeptics in the room, like, what's the business case, Marcel? Well, the business case is that if you do all of these things, because it's the right thing to do, it leads to higher performance, higher engagement, and all those things are going to give you better business outcomes.
And it's such a thing. You could talk to any executive, anybody who's listening on the podcast today, and you think back to like, who's the most effective or the most memorable leadership experience you had? You won't find a situation where it says, well, that leader was completely impatient with me. They just flew off the handle. I never knew what I was going to get. They were not kind to me at all. They treated me like garbage. It's not going to happen. And so the willingness to do good work inside of a business for a manager who isn't patient or isn't kind, it's just not there. And I think that I think that I really love you're giving us the antidotes to sort of some things that can crop up naturally if we allow them to. And kind of the third one in this vein is around being humble, and something that, you really demonstrate personally a lot too. How does humility, again, something we don't always celebrate in our leaders, but you're advocating for it here. How do I make that connection between leadership and humility?
Yeah, it's very simple. We have to, if you are a manager, a high level manager, you would assume that you know more than other people, right? That you might be the smartest guy, girl in the room. Well, you have to accept the limits of your knowledge to understand that there's a lot of smart people around you. But if you give them the permission to sort of own some of the decision making, if you come down to them to ask for input, perspective, how do things work? People on the front lines may know more about how to handle a customer than you, Mr. Manager, do. So you want to just get that kind of perspective. The other thing that humility does as a leader, which increases trust, is if you're willing to make mistakes, be willing to make mistakes, right? We're all human. We're going to make mistakes. So if you are willing to make mistakes, that opens up the door for other people to admit making mistakes, so you can course correct. And everyone kind of learn together. Oh, hey, we didn't know about this, right? We made a mistake. All right, how do we cover from this so it never happens again? What happens is people aren't admitting mistakes because they're afraid. They're afraid of how their boss is going to react to my error. And so what happens, it causes more errors down the line, right? And so in accepting that, okay, we made a mistake here, then you can problem solve a lot quicker. And you want to also, as part of being humble, you want to embrace curiosity, because there's avenues there for learning and growing. So you want to ask lots of curious questions, and that's how you're humble. Accept the limits of your knowledge, ask for help when you need it, be willing to admit mistakes, and embrace curiosity.
I love the curiosity comment in particular, because everything is changing in the business. And when you go and you talk to any of your organizational leaders, you say, what's different than it was just even a couple of years ago? The business model is different, competition, technology advancement, the youngest generations to enter the workforce, everything's different. Like, how have you demonstrated curiosity about these things? Oh, interesting. We're trying to control for them. We're trying to, get things back to the way they were, as if we could ever go backward, right?
Yeah.
And just not possible. Humility is a big key for that. Your fourth one you touch on too, I also love, which is around being advocates, advocating for others, being advocacy oriented, for example. How, as a leader, a lot of times, if you want to get noticed, you want to get promoted, you got to really put the spotlight on yourself. But it seems like you're arguing that advocating for others is also important for leaders.
Yeah. This goes back to a little bit about compassion, right? We may be in an environment that things are not fair. So this advocacy piece speaks to justice. It speaks to equality, a lot of the DEI stuff, right? So leaders advocate for others by believing in their people, um, and that they're good and worthy and smart and capable. And so we believe in them to make the right choices. We advocate on their behalf by doing that, and then we want to protect we want to protect our employees as advocates, right? So we want to eliminate things that are unfair. Because if you don't, then that hits the mental health and well-being aspect that we spoke of earlier, right? So in order for us to be advocates, we want to make sure that the workplace is safe. We're not just talking about psychological safety, which is huge, but is the environment safe for people to come to work, right? Are they taken care of? Are you protecting their whole being, physical, spiritual, mental, right? Financial. Like if somebody lost a husband or a spouse or a partner, etc. Well, how do you advocate on behalf of that person when half of their income is gone and they have 3 kids to feed, right? That kind of thing. So, and then the gender equality piece, right, is still a big deal. Women are not compensated fairly to this day in relationship to the men with the same skill set as they have. So yeah, we want to advocate on behalf of women and minorities, LGBTQ, etc. That is the big piece of advocacy. And I use the term right the wrongs, right? RIGHT, the wrongs. You want to fix inequitable systems and unfair business practices that are keeping people from advancing. So that's advocacy.
It is. I know my leadership took a level up when I finally, it took me a while, but I finally realized not everyone's having the same work experience that I am, because not everyone is the same as me when it comes to everything you just mentioned, whether it's gender or preference or, today we see a lot of talk about neurodiversity. Not everyone's brain works like mine.
Ooh,
so I need to be
right.
mindful of that, right? So all these different things. But it brings us to the last one, which is around trustworthiness. And trust is something that we hear often about, but within your context and how you describe it, how is leadership expressed, or dependent upon, I would say, this high level of trust?
Yeah, there's ways that you want people to trust you, and you also want to extend trust to them as well. And I borrow that piece of extending trust first before it's earned from Stephen M.R. Covey, who really wrote the book on trust.
Sure did.
Yeah, and then the other piece that I mentioned that is going to increase your own trustworthiness is to assume positive intent. Hey, people are going to make mistakes, okay? But we assume, and through actionable love and care, we assume that people have good intentions behind their actions or words. The third thing I mentioned is that to lead through trustworthy behaviors, you lead selflessly. So that's the servant leadership piece, right? Give credit to others, and shine the spotlight on your people. Don't take the credit for the work they did. So this is all selfless styles of leadership. And then the last piece of the puzzle, if you're going to increase trust, you got to be transparent. You have to be vulnerable. Show up with emotional honesty, right? Speak your truth, the good, the bad, the ugly. If things are not going good, don't hide that from your workforce. Don't sweep things under the rug, because that's going to create uncertainty, confusion, and suspicion. So be vulnerable. Vulnerability is about trust, right? And trust, last time I checked, is the backbone of successful leadership. You want to build trustworthy relationships. So there you have it. That's the chapter on trust.
100%. And what I love most about your work, Marcel, is you take us to a place that we rarely go when we're talking about the deeply human, the deeply intense bits. For all the talk today about the mechanics of business and AI, and it's taken over different parts. You know what? The human bits are still as important as ever, if not more important than ever. So you take us to those places, but you don't leave it in this abstract, fuzzy, okay, but what am I going to do about it now? You've broken it down. You've talked about multiple dimensions of this very simple and straightforward, 5-step framework that's hard to do when you're actually in the leadership moment. That's when it's really tough. But I think you've really given us a map here and something that feels like we can actually, strive to get better at these things that we must get better at if we're going to be the types of leaders that we know we can become.
Yeah. Yeah. And anybody can learn those skills, Matt. It's, these are all traits and habits and skills that we learn by applying more of it. So that's, putting into practice. And that's how we create new neural pathways in the brain to increase our capacity to keep doing it more and more.
And the other thing I love about our conversations is we always like to have fun. I've got a fun trivia segment for us, something that, I tend to enjoy this. And so you and I are a team. We're going to get a trivia question I've never seen before. We're going to see how we do. Now, I know from a little bit about your background, one of the best managers you ever had was, his name was Bruce. And at the same time, you have a course called From Boss to Leader. And I was thinking Bruce and boss and the boss and Bruce Springsteen, of course, came to mind. So we're going to get a trivia question all about Bruce Springsteen. And here it comes. You and I are a team. Let's see how we do. I don't know Bruce Springsteen all that well. This might be on you. We're going to find out. Which of these iconic songs by Bruce Springsteen features the lyric "Tramps Like Us, Baby"? And then it has to fill in the blanks. Is it A, Born in the USA, B, Born to Run, or C, Dancing in the Dark? What do you think?
I'm going to go with Dancing in the Dark, which I believe was the first big hit off of Born in the USA. Born in the USA. Yeah. And I think that, are we looking for the song or the album? Audience, if you're playing along at home, you can take a listen. Tramps Like Us, Baby We Were, and then fill in the blank. I think we're going to get this one right. The answer is Born to Run. Born to Run. Is that what we said? I can't remember what we said. I think we got it. But Bruce Springsteen, long-standing success. We love it. But Marcel, I think you're rivaling the boss in that regard. You're the boss of this topic, that's for sure. So I'm going to give you an even better question, though, which is, where can my listeners go to learn more about you and about this amazing new book of yours? I'm going to point them. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, right? And you got my website, marcelschwantes.com. But I am really stoked about my Substack platform, because once you subscribe, you can get bonus book material that did not make the book. Plus, I will share more about the book. If you are still kind of on the fence, do I purchase Marcel books? Go to marcelschwantes.substack.com, subscribe, and click on Humane Leadership, and I will give you all kinds of goodies from the book there.
I love it. Listeners, I'm going to have that link for you and all the others that Marcel just mentioned in the show notes. You're only one click away from getting over to his Substack and checking out all about humane leadership. Marcel, thanks so much for being with me today. I've really enjoyed the conversation, as always.
It's been a blast. Let's do it again.